Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesdays. Today it is my absolute honor to have Malcolm Burrows with us.
Here's a story of a fundraiser who was launching his very own web show. Each episode is very short due to edits, so it can really flow. Here's a story of a podcast guest star who was busy raising money of their own. They were each great in their own way, fundraising in his own. Till the one day when Jack asked a guest to join him, and they knew it was much more than a jest, that these guests must somehow form a resource. That's the way they all became the podcast guests. The podcast guests, the podcast guests. That's the way they became the podcast guests.
Malcolm is a philanthropic advisor and gift planner with over 34 years of experience. He's the head of Philanthropic Advisory Services at Scotia Wealth Management. He founded and leads Aqueduct Foundation, a public foundation with donor-advised funds. Aqueduct is the 13th largest foundation in Canada by assets and has granted over $766 million to registered charities since its inception almost 20 years ago. He also leads Scotia Wealth Management's 100-year-old private foundation services practices. Before joining Scotia, he worked for 3 major Toronto charities from 1990 to 2004 and started his career in the arts. Malcolm is an active educator, writer, and volunteer in the charitable sector and wealth planning community. Through the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, he has contributed to the development of new charitable tax incentives, including the elimination of capital gains on gifts of public securities and the estate donation rules. His proposal for gifts of private securities and taxable real estate, published by C.D. Howe Institute, was included in the 2015 federal budget. He was CAGP's course director from 1999 to 2011 and is a member of the Government Relations Committee. So, welcome, Malcolm.
Thanks, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you've been at this for, 30 plus years. I'm coming close to that. And, every now and then I'll get someone call me up and say, Jack, I have a friend of mine who's thinking about getting into the fundraising business. Can they take you for a beer or a coffee or whatever and
hell yeah,
pick your brain, right? And I'm always good with that. What would you tell someone who's kind of thinking about coming into this world? Because it's a much different world than it was when we started 25 or 30 years ago.
Be grounded and realize that it's a profession that you need to have knowledge, you need to have discipline. There's a lot of hard work. Sometimes there's a perception that working in the charitable sector is it's meaningful work. It's there's this rosy glow to it outside looking in, and they're just human organizations that are trying to do good. They have their challenges, and there's all sorts of structural challenges in the charitable sector as well. So taking off the rose-tinted glasses, and this is sometimes I found with corporate refugees over time. I'm looking for, I had somebody once say, to enrich my soul, I'm looking for meaningful work after. It's just sort of like, it's going to be really, really hard work. And there's going to be a level of challenge at charities that you probably didn't anticipate. And as if you're a good professional, but don't look at it as a dilettante. Don't look at it as a tourist. Look at it as a professional. And it's an extraordinary, being in a values-lined environment is immensely important. But it's don't come with rosy-colored glasses is one of my key messages.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had one of my colleagues started off in the corporate world, and they were used to having big budgets to be able to do A, B, and C, and I'm like, no. A charity, for whatever reason, is rewarded the less money they spend on overhead, which is such a silly concept.
Yeah.
I'm one of the few people that still gets physical newspapers. And you see that all the car companies put a full page color ad in almost every single day. No one ever complains to Ford and saying, how much are you spending on marketing? Because obviously someone's done the calculation that says, for every dollar we spend, we're going to make, $12 or whatever the case may be. But in the fundraising world, they just look at it as an expense. And if you spend less, you're actually rewarded for it. And it hurts the smaller charities disproportionately so.
Very
the ones
much
that have huge staff, right?
Absolutely. And I came out of it because I worked for 3 large, wonderful charities in Toronto, 2 teaching hospitals, a university. And one of the things that I became very aware of is that I was working in a system that made the best fundraisers win. I mean, children's hospitals, for example, I worked for one, had very little pressure in terms of their, administrative costs. There wasn't the sort of rigor and judgment that with this large beloved charity. And if anything, this is going back years. I have no comment on the current leadership there. But at one point, I would say, if anything, we were fat. We were really, really fat. And then I looked, talking to colleagues who were, literally hand to mouth and constantly being judged for, essentially getting a new pen. It was absurd. And there was this disconnect, and there's not some objective standard. And effective organizations invest. And I'm constantly working with donors to help educate, because there's this often a knee jerk. I don't want them to be spending too much. I don't want them, it's that.
And my response is always, what's too much? Like,
yeah.
The people that always complain about, a cost to raise $1, in my world, at least I've always seen, no matter what that number is, it's too much. That's right. If you get it down to 1%, so I'd say it's too much.
It's too much, because it's one of those classic exceptions, right? It's sort of they're exceptions. They're making an objection that has nothing to do with this the substance of it. It's just a rote way of saying no, they're not interested, and that's one of those move on. Again, finding people that deeply believe in mission and the success of mission. They're not the ones that are going to say, only 5%, it has to be all volunteer, never pay a fundraiser. That's nuts. You're not going to be an effective organization. You're not going to address this vital social need with that kind of mentality.
100%. I always kind of tongue-in-cheek joke that, someone passes away from cancer in Ottawa, and if you wanted to make a donation in their memory, there's no less than 25 places in Ottawa that you could give a charitable gift to in memory of that person. Yes. And the donor just wants to eradicate cancer, right? Yeah. They don't care whether it's this organization or that one or this hospital or this research institute, but there's such a proliferation and such a duplication of efforts that are out there. Because CRA, when they approve charities, they don't ask whether you're needed. They just make sure that you have your governance all set up appropriately. And, it's not the government's role to kind of say, we have too many people in the cancer charity business or in this business. But, you look at it holistically, the 20,000-foot level, and you scratch your head and you're going, geez Louise, what are they doing? And then if they do find a cure or find, like March of Dimes was again to cure polio, well, that's done. So what did they do? Well, they kind of said, we'll all be out of a job if we just say mission accomplished. So they change it to birth defects, which can then fall under a whole host umbrella of different issues, and they can keep going. I think that, wouldn't it be great if a bunch of the charities closed up shop because mission accomplished? Right. We wanted to eradicate homelessness in this area. Done.
I think
that's
huge. Mission, I partly agree with that. But I would also say mission evolved, because competent organizations need to be dynamic. They need to address new needs. I mean, CNIB, for example, came out of the First World War. It was sort of essentially a veterans organization to deal with all of those vets that came back after losing their sight after being gassed. And but they were able to think by analogy and say, let's look at visual impairment. Let's look at that independence. And it becomes looking into the future as opposed to just dealing with the triggering or the initial need, I think is really important, and having organizations that continue on. So I don't view that. I view that as a positive thing generally. Sometimes there's an absolute dead end and they should just close down and move on. But a lot of the time, I think that there's other adjacent needs that you can take your skills and really apply them to.
Yeah. Well, Malcolm, this has been absolutely amazing. I love chatting with you. I've heard you speak dozens of times. I can recall once here in Ottawa, I remember giving you a lift out to the airport after you spoke somewhere. If folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, just one of the best ways at this point is just through LinkedIn. I mean, send me a request. Anybody from the sector becomes a connection on LinkedIn. I really think it's important, and I have a lot of channels that open up, lots of chats, as I said, I'm constantly learning from sector colleagues. It's so important to me. The worst thing that I could do is, I'm literally in a large tower right now that's having power problems because of the large summer rainstorm, but in a large tower in downtown Toronto. And it's so important to have that connection, to have the colleagues, to have these different experiences. And so I always, every week I did spend time with colleagues from the sector. I'm learning, I'm finding out what they do. Sometimes we're able to help with funding and things like that. But if I don't have that ongoing engagement, if I don't have that ongoing learning, one of my great fears in life is to become a fogey. I don't want to be a fogey, and I need that connection with my colleagues in the sector as a result.
Malcolm, this has been absolutely amazing, and I thank you so much for coming on.
Well, Jack, thanks for the invitation. It's just been great. I really appreciate it.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.